My name is Hugh Prescott. In my 67 years, I thought I had learned to accept life as it is, with all its twists and turns. Every wrinkle on my face is a testament to the years I've lived, every gray hair a memory of my experiences. But fate continues to teach me lessons, and some of them are bitter. For 12 years now, I have lived alone in a small house on the outskirts of Avenel. It's a quiet little town where everyone knows each other, where the mornings smell of freshly cut grass and the evenings are filled with neighbors gathering on their porches to discuss the latest news. I moved here after I retired, tired of the noise of the big city and the endless roads I traveled during my 35 years as a trucker. My wife Edith died almost 15 years ago. Cancer took her quickly before we could even say goodbye. Our marriage produced only one child, our son Quentin. He was a good kid, inherited my love of roads and cars, but chose a different path. He became a civil engineer. He built bridges that connected the coasts, while I just drove on roads that were already finished. Quentin died 6 years ago. A ridiculous accident on a construction site. A beam collapsed. He was only 42. Bearing my son left me all alone. Well, almost alone. I had a grandson, Lawrence, who was 22 at the time. I wasn't very close to him while he was growing up. I spent too much time on the road. But after Quentin died, we saw each other more often. Lawrence came over on weekends, sometimes stayed for dinner, and talked about his work at the computer company. I was proud of him. Smart, responsible, with a good education, which I partially paid for from my savings. That all changed 3 years ago when Lawrence met Beatrice. She worked for the same company as him, something to do with advertising. From the first time I met her, this woman had taken an inexplicable dislike to me. Maybe it was the way she looked at me, assessing, cold, or in the way she wrinkled her nose subtly as she looked around my modest home. But I tried not to show my attitude. Lawrence looked happy around her, and that was enough. Their wedding took place a year after they met, a small ceremony at which I felt superfluous. Beatrice's friends, young, fashionably dressed people with loud voices and superficial conversations, looked at me as if I were an exhibit from a museum. I heard one of the bridesmaids whisper to another, "Is that the trucker, Grandpa? He looks like he just got out of the cab of a truck." They laughed, not realizing my hearing was still excellent. After the wedding, our visits with Lawrence became less frequent. He called occasionally, asking how I was doing, but I felt it was more duty than genuine interest. When they did visit with Beatrice, she sat with a strained smile, refused my homemade pie, "Watch your figure, Grandpa," and kept glancing at her watch. Lawrence, too, changed under her influence. He became more aloof, sometimes repeating her words and intonations, as if he had lost his own voice. One day they arrived with the news that Beatrice was pregnant. I was genuinely happy for them, offered to help, but Beatrice immediately cut me off. "Thank you, Hugh, but we can manage. We have an army of nannies and my mother." That evening after they left, I sat on the veranda for a long time looking up at the stars. Thoughts of a great-grandson or great-great-granddaughter mingled with the bitterness of realizing that I probably wouldn't be an important part of their lives. It was painful to admit, but I always preferred to face the truth. Beatrice's pregnancy coincided with their active search for a new place to live. They had been renting an apartment in downtown Avenel, but now with a baby on the way, they wanted a house with a garden in a decent neighborhood, as Beatrice put it in one of our rare phone conversations. I knew they were having financial difficulties. Despite having a good job, Lawrence was still paying off his education loan, and Beatrice was in the habit of living beyond her means. I, on the other hand, had managed to save a decent amount over the years. Truckers make good money, and I've always been frugal. In addition, a few years ago, my old friend advised me to invest in stocks, which suddenly shot up, bringing me a solid income. The idea of giving a house to a young family came to me suddenly. I was sitting on my veranda watching the neighborhood children playing on the lawn. Their laughter reminded me of the times when Quentin was little, and Edith and I dreamed of a big house with a garden where our grandchildren would run and play. Now I had the opportunity to realize that dream, albeit several decades late. The next day I called Lawrence and offered to meet. He sounded surprised. Usually the initiative came from him. We agreed to see each other on Saturday at my favorite cafe, Pearl's, which served the best apple pie in Avenel. Lawrence came alone, which pleased me. He looked tired, shadows under his eyes. "Everything all right, boy?" I asked him when we sat down at the table by the window. Yeah, just a lot of work, he rubbed his eyes. And Beatrice, she's 5 months pregnant now. Hormones, mood swings every 5 minutes. I nodded, remembering when Edith was pregnant with Quentin. She was emotional too, but never used her situation as an excuse to be rude. I hear you're looking for a house, I said, getting to the point. Lawrence sighed. Yes, but it's a nightmare. Prices have skyrocketed, and the bank has denied us a mortgage because of my education loan. Beatrice is furious. She's already got her eye on a house in Oak Hill, but Oak Hill was the most exclusive neighborhood in Avenel. I held back a chuckle, typical of Beatrice to want what they can't afford. Listen, Lawrence, I leaned forward. I have a proposition. I want to help you with the house. He frowned. Thank you, Grandpa, but we can't take money from you. It's too much. I'm not offering to lend you money, I shook my head. I want to buy you a house. As a gift. Lawrence stared at me as if I'd said I was going to fly to the moon. You? What? But, why? How? I told him about my savings, my investments, how I'd always been a frugal person. I explained that I wanted my great-grandson or great-granddaughter to grow up in a nice house with a garden to play in. I don't know what to say, Lawrence muttered, his eyes glittering suspiciously. That's incredibly generous, grandfather. You're my grandson, Lawrence, I replied simply, and the only family I have left. As we said our goodbyes as we left the cafe, Lawrence hugged me tightly for the first time in a long time. I felt something warm spill into my chest. Maybe this gift would help us grow closer again. The next day, Lawrence called to tell me that Beatrice was delighted with my proposal. He handed the receiver to her, and I heard her voice, unexpectedly warm and friendly. Hugh, I don't know how to express our gratitude. It's so generous of you. Lawrence and I were just looking at a house in Oak Hill, and it's just perfect for us. Perhaps you could join us at our next viewing? I agreed, though something in her sudden enthusiasm made me wary. In the 3 years I'd known her, Beatrice had never shown such warmth toward me, but I pushed the thought away. Perhaps the news of the baby and my gift had really changed her attitude. The following Saturday, we met at the house they had been looking at. It was a beautiful 2-story building with a white picket fence and a large manicured garden. The realtor, a thin woman with bright red lipstick, walked us through the rooms, praising the original wood floors and great natural light. The house was really nice, but the price... I almost whistled when I saw the numbers in the brochure. You could buy 3 houses like that for that kind of money in my day. But the look on Beatrice's face as she stood at the big window in the living room with her hand on her belly, envisioning her future in this house, kept me quiet. What do you think, Grandpa? Lawrence asked when the realtor stepped out to give us time to discuss. It's a nice house, I answered cautiously. But the price... Oh, Hugh! Beatrice turned to me with a smile that made me cringe. We realize it's expensive. We can look at something simpler. Her tone said otherwise. Her eyes read, You don't want your great-grandson growing up in a cheap neighborhood, do you? I sighed. After all, what would I do with the money? Save it up until I die? Or maybe spend it on that cruise I've been dreaming about for the last few years. But the cruise will be over in a couple weeks, and the house will stay in my family for years to come. If you like this house, let's take it, I said, and Beatrice literally shrieked with joy as she threw her arms around me. Her perfume, too sweet and cloying, filled the space around her for a moment. At that moment, watching the happy faces of Lawrence and Beatrice, I thought I had made the right decision. I did not yet know how bitterly I would come to regret it. The next 2 weeks became a marathon of house hunting. Beatrice insisted that I attend every viewing. At first I was flattered. I thought she cared about my opinion. It quickly became clear that what she really wanted was me as a living wallet, showing the realtors that the money was there and haggling was inappropriate. We looked at 8 houses, and they were all in Oak Hill. I offered to look at other neighborhoods more affordable, but still decent. But Beatrice pursed her lips and said the same thing. Hugh, you want your great-grandson to grow up in a decent environment, don't you? And I would shut up, feeling guilty about my practicality. After all, I did want the best for them. Lawrence always stood aside in these arguments, shuffling awkwardly from foot to foot and avoiding my gaze. At such moments, I saw him as the little boy who stood between Quentin and me during our rare but loud arguments. The house Beatrice eventually chose wasn't the most expensive of the houses she looked at, but it was definitely the most prestigious in terms of location. It had 2 floors, 4 bedrooms, a large kitchen dining room, and a garden where, according to the realtor, you could barbecue for 50 guests. Why they would have a garden for 50 guests, I didn't understand. But Beatrice was literally glowing as she envisioned future receptions. Just think, Lawrence, we could have all our friends here and have summer parties by the pool. Shermanimam. There's no pool, I remarked, looking around the overgrown garden, which was clearly in need of work. Beatrice gave me a look of obvious annoyance, but quickly changed it to a smile. We'll build one, of course. In time, the realtor, sensing the tension, quickly turned the conversation to the neighborhood's advantages: proximity to good schools, low crime rate, easy access to shopping. And importantly, very decent neighbors, and she added, glancing at my worn denim jacket. I swallowed the barb. All my life I'd been used to dressing practical and comfortable, not chasing fashion. Next to elegant Beatrice in her designer maternity dress, and Lawrence in a suit that I knew cost more than a month's rent for his apartment, I really did look like someone from another world. That was the case, though. During the checkout process, I noticed for the first time Beatrice and Lawrence glancing over at me when they thought I couldn't see. Those looks spoke more than 1,000 words. There was disbelief in them, as if they still couldn't believe that I was really buying them a house and something else that I couldn't quite pinpoint, but that made me sick to my stomach. My attorney, Silas Porter, whom we knew from my days as an active trucker, suggested that the house be deeded as a gift with some conditions. Hugh, I understand your desire to help your grandson, but let's be smart about this, he said when we met in his office to discuss the details. I suggest we include a clause that if the house is sold within, say, 10 years, a portion of the proceeds must be returned to you. I shook my head. It's a gift, Silas. No strings attached. I trust Lawrence. Porter, with his wrinkled face that had probably seen more family drama than any psychologist, sighed. It's not a matter of trusting Lawrence. I saw his wife last week at the supermarket. She was on the phone and didn't notice me. You know what she said? The old man finally splurged. Now we can live like normal people. I felt something cold slide down my spine, but I tried to stay calm. Beatrice can be abrupt sometimes. It doesn't mean she's a bad person. Hugh, Silas took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose tiredly. I've been your friend for 30 years. And as a friend, I'm telling you to be careful. At least let's make a contract so that you have some protection. After much discussion, we came to a compromise. The house would be deeded as a gift, but with an option to revoke the gift in the event of extreme ingratitude on the part of the giver. A legal term that Silas explained gives the giver some protection. I hope you never have to use this loophole, he said as we signed the papers, but it's better to be safe. I nodded, though I was sure inwardly that I would never use that clause. Despite my doubts, Lawrence was my grandson, my blood. I believed that somewhere deep down inside, he was still the little boy who used to come to my garage to help me fix up the old pickup truck. The deal closed in early May. The weather was beautiful, warm and sunny, as if nature itself approved of my decision. We met at the realtor's office, me, Lawrence, Beatrice, Silas, and the seller's representative. When all the documents were signed, the realtor ceremoniously handed Lawrence the keys to the house. Congratulations on your purchase, she exclaimed with a professional smile. Beatrice, whose belly was already noticeably rounded, practically snatched the keys from Lawrence's hands. Oh, this is so exciting. We can finally start settling in. Her eyes shone, but not with gratitude to me, but with anticipation of a new life in an upscale neighborhood. Thank you, Grandpa, Lawrence said quietly, hugging me. Yeah, we'll never forget this. Something in his voice sounded insincere, like a learned phrase, but I pushed the thought away. Today was a happy day, and I didn't want to mar it with suspicion. After signing the papers, Beatrice suggested we celebrate at a restaurant. I'd chosen my favorite place, a small family-run place called Oliver's that served the best steaks in town. But Beatrice frowned. Hugh, it's such an occasion. Let's celebrate at the Azure. where they've recently opened a terrace overlooking the lake. The Azure was the most expensive restaurant in Avenel, a place where a meal for three cost as much as a week's supply of groceries. I started to object, but Lawrence quickly intervened. "Grandpa, today is a special day. Let us treat you." And I agreed, although I knew in my gut that they would be treating me with my own money, the very money I had just spent on their house. The restaurant was exactly as pretentious as I expected. Waiters in white gloves, menus without prices, a bad sign, and portions so small I wanted to stop at a diner for a proper burger after dinner. But Beatrice felt like a fish out of water here, addressing the waiters with the nonchalant confidence of someone used to luxury. "So when do you plan to move in?" I asked when we were served our main courses. "Next weekend," Beatrice replied, sipping her water. Alcohol was contraindicated because she was pregnant. "I've already hired a crew for the renovation. I need to repaint the walls and completely renovate the bathrooms." I raised my eyebrows in surprise. "Repairs? The house is in perfect condition." Beatrice smiled indulgently. "Hugh, you saw the horrible wallpaper in the bedroom, and the tiles in the bathroom scream 90s. We want to make it modern and stylish." I didn't say anything, although I wanted to say that the house had been renovated only 3 years ago and everything looked more than decent. But I realized that Beatrice wanted to leave her mark, to make the house hers. That's fine, I decided. After all, they'd be living there. "If you need help moving, I started, but Beatrice interrupted. "Oh, thank you, but we've already organized everything. A professional company will do it quickly and neatly." She glanced at my hands, which were calloused from decades of working with machinery and the steering wheel. "Akronym, we don't want to bother you." "I'm still strong enough to lift a couple boxes," I said, trying to make it sound like a joke, not an insult. "Of course, Grandpa," Lawrence interjected, clearly sensing the tension. "But moving is so stressful. We want it to go as smoothly as possible, especially considering Beatrice's condition." I nodded, realizing that I was being politely removed from the process. It was frustrating, but I decided not to show my feelings. In the end, what mattered was that Lawrence and his family would be living in a good home, not my involvement in their lives. For the next 2 weeks, I hardly saw Lawrence. He called a couple times, always in a hurry, to tell me about the progress of the renovation and the move. But each time he found a reason why I couldn't come to see it. The workers were making a mess. Beatrice wasn't feeling well and needed to rest. Or they were struggling to keep up between work and the new house. I didn't insist, though I felt increasingly detached. Instead, I focused on my own home, fixing the leaky faucet in the kitchen, trimming the hedge, going through old photo albums. In one of the photos, Quentin was holding little Lawrence in his arms, both smiling at the camera. I stared at that photo for a long time, trying to see that open, joyful boy in the Lawrence of today. Finally, Lawrence called with an invitation. "Grandpa, we're done with the major renovations and want to have a housewarming party this Saturday. It's nothing fancy, just a little dinner with the closest people. Will you come?" Of course, I said yes. All week I'd been thinking about the evening, and I'd even bought a new shirt, a blue shirt with a small pattern that the salesgirl said made me look younger. I wanted to make a good impression not only on Lawrence and Beatrice, but also on their friends, who I assumed would also be invited. Saturday morning, I stopped by the flower store and picked out a large bouquet for Beatrice. Pink lilies, her favorite, as Lawrence had once mentioned. I also bought a bottle of good whiskey for Lawrence and a small teddy bear for the baby-to-be. They weren't the most expensive gifts. The house was already my main investment, but I wanted to show that I was thinking of them, that I cared. As I drove up to their new home in the evening, I noticed many cars parked along the street. Apparently, a small dinner with the closest of friends had turned into a full-blown party. This made me a little uneasy. I wasn't prepared for large crowds, especially since most of Lawrence and Beatrice's friends were considerably younger than me. After parking, I grabbed my gifts and headed toward the house. I could hear the music from the street, something modern, with a heavy beat, not at all my type. The door was opened by Lawrence, dressed in an elegant gray suit that made him look even more like his father. "Grandfather," he hugged me, smelling of expensive cologne and a little alcohol. "Come in. We've already started." Inside, the house was transformed. The walls, previously painted a warm beige color, were now a cool gray shade. The wooden floors of which the previous owner had been so proud were hidden under light-colored laminate. All the furniture was new in a modern style. Lots of glass, metal, and leather. Not a single detail that reminded me of the cozy home I'd seen when I'd bought it. There were about 20 people gathered in the living room. Young couples dressed as if they were attending a fashion show rather than a house party. They were holding wine glasses and laughing loudly at jokes I couldn't hear over the music. Lawrence led me through the crowd to Beatrice, who was seated on a large white couch like a queen receiving her subjects. Her belly had already rounded out, but that didn't stop her from wearing a tight black dress and high heels. "Hugh!" She smiled but made no attempt to get up. "How nice of you to come." I handed her a bouquet and a gift for the baby. "Congratulations on the housewarming, Beatrice." She took the gifts, took a quick glance at them and put them aside. "Thank you. That's very nice. Lawrence, dear, could you get me some water?" She turned to her friend sitting next to her, completely ignoring me. Lawrence smiled apologetically at me and headed for the kitchen. I remained standing next to the couch, feeling out of place and superfluous. None of the guests showed any interest in me. No one came over to meet me. I was just an old man in a new shirt who somehow ended up at their fancy party. Finally, Lawrence returned with a glass of water for Beatrice and a glass of whiskey for me. "Here, Grandpa, is your favorite. Come on, I'll show you the house. We've changed a lot of things since we bought it." The tour of the house was quick and perfunctory. Lawrence was clearly in a hurry to get back to his guests, walking me from room to room with minimal commentary. Everything had been remodeled in the same modern style, cold and impersonal, in my opinion. The baby's room was the only exception. There the walls were painted a soft yellow color, and there was a fluffy rug on the floor. "We don't know the sex of the baby, so we chose neutral colors," Lawrence explained, showing real enthusiasm for the first time that evening. Beatrice had wanted to know in advance, but I'd insisted on a surprise. I smiled, remembering how Edith and I had also wanted a surprise when we were waiting for Quentin. "That's right," I said. "Some things should be left unknown until the last moment. It's more interesting that way." Lawrence nodded, and for a moment there was a flicker of understanding between us, a reminder that we were family after all. But the moment was interrupted by loud laughter from the living room and Beatrice's voice calling to Lawrence. "Dash, come," he said. "It seems time to serve dinner." Dinner was served in the dining room, where a huge glass table was set with dishes evidently ordered from a restaurant. No home-cooked food, nothing prepared with love, just beautiful presentation and small portions. I sat between two strangers, a young man who introduced himself as a colleague of Lawrence's, and a woman who seemed to be Beatrice's friend from high school. Both politely said hello to me, but quickly returned to their conversations with other guests, leaving me isolated. In the middle of dinner, Lawrence stood up with a glass of champagne. "Friends, I would like to toast to our new home and the new chapter in our lives with Beatrice. Soon there will be 3 of us, and we are incredibly grateful for your support and friendship." Everyone raised their glasses, congratulating the young couple. Not a word about me, not a hint of where this house came from. I sat there, clutching my whiskey glass, feeling the bitterness growing inside. Not because of the lack of recognition, I'd never sought public gratitude, but the realization of how much of a stranger I had become to my own grandson. After dinner, the guests moved back into the living room, where the dancing began. The music got even louder. The lights dimmed. I found a quiet corner on the veranda where I could sit in relative peace. I had a view of the garden, which was already being beautified with new bushes and garden furniture. I sat there, sipping my whiskey and thinking about how my relationship with Lawrence had changed over the years. We used to be closer before Beatrice came along. Not really close. The years of working away from home had created a distance between us, but still there was a connection, a mutual respect. Now I felt like an outsider, someone who had fulfilled his function, buying a house, and was no longer needed. My thoughts were interrupted by Lawrence, who came out onto the veranda with 2 glasses. "There you are, Grandpa. I've been looking for you." He handed me a fresh whiskey. "Are you okay here? I know the music is a little loud." "I'm fine," I replied, trying to sound sincere. "It's a nice house, Lawrence. You and Beatrice have changed a lot of things." He sat down beside me, looking out over the garden. "Yes, Beatrice wanted to create something of her own. You know, women and their ideas of the perfect home. I nodded, though I didn't really understand. Edith had never sought luxury or prestige. Our home had always been modest but cozy, full of life and love. Lawrence, I began cautiously, are you happy? He turned to me, surprised by the question. Of course, grandfather. I have everything: a good job, a beautiful wife, a baby on the way, and now this beautiful house. How can I be unhappy? But something in his eyes, some shadow, made me doubt the sincerity of his words. I didn't press him, though. Then I'm happy for you. That's all I ever wanted, your happiness. Lawrence looked at me for a long moment, as if he wanted to say something, but changed his mind. Instead, he simply raised his glass. To family. To family, I echoed, clinking my glass with his. We sat in silence for a few more minutes before Beatrice called out to him from inside. Lawrence apologized and left, leaving me alone on the veranda with my thoughts and unfinished whiskey. The party went on until late into the night, but I decided to leave early. I found Lawrence to say goodbye, but he was busy dancing with Beatrice to slow music. I waved at him from afar and headed for the exit, trying not to attract attention. Already sitting in the car, I looked up at the brightly lit house filled with laughter and music. A house I had bought with the hope of bonding with my grandson, but which seemed to have only widened the gap between us. And yet I didn't regret my decision. Maybe having a child would change everything. Maybe by becoming a father, Lawrence would better understand the value of family and roots. I clung to that hope as I started the engine and drove out onto the dark street. It had been about a month since the housewarming party. I heard nothing from Lawrence and Beatrice except a short message thanking me for coming. Even that message was dry and formal, as if sent out of courtesy rather than from the heart. I wasn't offended. I understood that a young family has a lot on its plate, especially with the baby on the way. June was hot. I spent most of my time in my garden, watering the flowers and trimming the bushes. The garden was always my sanctuary, a place where I felt connected to Edith. She loved flowers, especially peonies, which were now in full bloom. Sometimes, working amongst the plants, I would talk to her, telling her my thoughts and experiences. I know it may seem strange, but it seemed to me that somewhere she was hearing me and smiling. One of those days, as the sun was beginning to set, coloring the sky shades of orange and pink, my old friend Norman Higgs came to visit me. We had met when we were both young, when we were both starting our careers as truckers. Unlike me, Norman was still working even though he was already 69. You look too broody for a man who's just given away a fortune, he said, settling into a chair on my veranda and taking a bottle of beer. I grinned, thinking about my grandson. We haven't talked since the housewarming party. Norman shook his head. You're too kind, Hugh. Always have been. He took a sip of beer. Remember when that guy in Tulsa cheated you? What was his name? Randall Witt. I remembered the story in great detail. He pretended his car broke down, so I gave him a ride to the next town, and then I discovered my gold chain from Edith was missing. That's right. You weren't even angry then. Said maybe he needed it more. I shrugged. Angry wouldn't have gotten me the necklace back. Besides, Randall, unlike Lawrence, wasn't my family. Norman finished his beer and opened a second bottle. You know, I drove by their new house the other day. There were a bunch of cars there. It looked like a party. I tried not to show how hurt I was by the message. Another party, and again uninvited for me. They're young, they need to socialize with their peers, I said, more to convince myself than Norman. Come on, Hugh, you spent a lot of money on them. They could have at least invited you. I didn't answer, not wanting to delve into the subject. Instead, we spent the evening reminiscing about old times and planning next week's fishing trip. Norman left around 9, leaving me alone with my thoughts again. The next morning the phone rang. It was Lawrence, and his voice sounded unusually animated. Grandpa, you have to come over today. We're having a barbecue. It'll be fun. I was surprised and touched by the sudden invitation. Sure, I'd love to. What time? We start at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And grandfather? He paused. Thank you for being here. That phrase warmed my heart. Maybe I was wrong about Lawrence's estrangement. Maybe he was just busy settling into his new home and preparing for fatherhood. I spent the morning preparing for the visit. I went to the store for a good wine, for other guests since Beatrice was not allowed to drink, Bought flowers and a small gift for the future child, a soft plush elephant, which I saw in the window of a children's store. On the gift wrapping, I left a simple inscription, with love from great-grandpa. The weather that day was perfect for a barbecue. Sunny but not too hot, with a light breeze that carried the smell of blossoming trees. I was in high spirits, looking forward to a day with my family. Maybe this would be the beginning of a new phase in our relationship. As I pulled up to Lawrence's house, I noticed a few cars in the driveway and along the street. Not as many as at a housewarming party, but still enough to realize this wasn't just a family dinner party. I parked, grabbed my gifts, and headed toward the house. The front door was open, voices and laughter coming from inside. I rang the bell, not wanting to just walk in even though I was invited. The door was opened by Lawrence, dressed in light-colored pants and a blue shirt, with a glass of beer in his hand. "Grandpa," he put his free arm around me. "Owen, come in. Everyone is already in the backyard." I handed him the wine. I didn't know what to bring, but I thought it would never be out of place. "Great, thanks." He took the bottle. "Come on through to the backyard. I'll join you in a minute. Just taking this to the kitchen." I walked through the house to the backyard. The grounds had been transformed since my last visit. There were new garden paths, a beautiful gazebo, and a large barbecue area with a stone stove. There was a long table on the lawn, covered with a white tablecloth, around which the guests were seated, about 15 people, most of whom I'd seen at the housewarming party. Beatrice sat at the head of the table, her belly having rounded out considerably over the past month. She was wearing an elegant cream-colored summer dress and looked radiant. Next to her sat an older woman with the same blonde hair and sharp features, probably her mother. I approached the table, feeling the stares of the guests, many of whom were clearly puzzled as to who I was. "Hello, Beatrice," I said, handing her the flowers. "Thank you for inviting me." She looked at me with an expression I couldn't read, surprise mixed with something else. "Hugh." She took the flowers but didn't smile. "I didn't expect to see you." I was confused. "Lawrence invited me this morning. Said you were having a barbecue." Beatrice looked toward the house where Lawrence had disappeared. Her eyes narrowed. "Well, while you're here," she pointed to a vacant chair at the far end of the table. "Have a seat." I felt awkward, but sat down, placing the baby gift beside me. The woman to my right, a young girl with bright red hair, smiled politely. "Hello, I'm Pearl, Beatrice's friend." "Hugh Prescott," I introduced myself, Lawrence's grandfather. "Oh," her eyes widened in surprise. "Dash nice to meet you." Apparently Beatrice hadn't mentioned me to her friends. Or worse, she had, but in such a context that my appearance was surprising. Lawrence came out into the courtyard a few minutes later, carrying a tray of drinks. He placed a glass of something non-alcoholic in front of Beatrice and addressed the guests. "So, thank you all for coming. Beatrice and I are happy to have you in our new home." Again, not a word about where the house had come from. I began to suspect that Lawrence and Beatrice preferred not to mention my involvement in the purchase of the house. Maybe they were ashamed to admit that they couldn't buy it on their own. The barbecue has begun. Lawrence and another man took over the grill, cooking steaks and vegetables. The guests broke into small groups, chatting and laughing. I sat in my corner of the table, feeling increasingly out of place. Pearl tried to keep the conversation going, but it was obvious she had nothing to talk about with a man 3 times her age. The woman sitting next to Beatrice, whom I took to be her mother, cast several appraising glances in my direction. Finally, she leaned toward Beatrice and whispered something in her ear. Beatrice nodded, and both women looked at me with barely concealed disdain. When the meal was ready, everyone reassembled around the table. Lawrence sat next to Beatrice without looking in my direction. I tried to catch his eye, but he was busy talking to the other guests. The food was delicious, but I could barely taste it. All my attention was focused on trying not to look completely alone and out of place. I kept up polite conversation with my table mates, but I felt like a stranger at this celebration of life. After the main course, Beatrice stood up and rang her glass, attracting attention. "Friends, we have news to share with you." Everyone fell silent, looking at her expectantly. Lawrence stood beside her, putting his arm around her shoulders. "We have found out the sex of our baby," Beatrice announced, shining with happiness. "It's a girl." The guests burst into applause and congratulations. I clapped too, happy for them, though I was a little hurt that Lawrence had not told me the news personally. "And we've already picked out a name," Beatrice continued, stroking her belly. She will be Chloe Elizabeth Prescott. Again, applause and cheers of approval. Elizabeth, I knew, was Beatrice's mother's name. Not that I expected them to name a daughter after Edith, but still, this detail once again emphasized whose side of the family was considered more important. To Chloe, someone proposed a toast and everyone raised their glasses. To Chloe, I echoed, raising my glass of lemonade. I didn't drink alcohol while driving, even on such occasions. After the toast, I decided it was a good time for a gift. I stood up and walked over to Beatrice with a small package. Congratulations to both of you. I brought a small gift for Chloe. Beatrice took the package with an expression as if I had handed her something unpleasant. Thank you, Hugh, but we don't need toys. We have too many already. I was taken aback by her rudeness. It's just a little token of attention. I said we don't need it. Her voice became harsher. You've done enough already. There was a tense silence in the air. The guests looked at each other, clearly feeling the awkwardness of the situation. Lawrence stood next to Beatrice, not looking at me. Dash, I just wanted to dash. Dash, listen, Hugh, she said loudly, not caring that everyone could hear her. We're grateful for the house, we really are. But let's be honest, you're not part of our lives. You were never particularly interested in Lawrence when he was growing up. You only showed up now, with money, thinking you could buy your way into our family. I was taken aback by her words, especially because there was some truth to them. I really hadn't been around Lawrence during his childhood as much as I should have been, but the motives she attributed to me were quite wrong. Beatrice, I never tried to. I began again, but she wouldn't let me finish. Do you think we don't know that you are hoping for something in return? Perhaps a place in our home when you're too old to live on your own? Or for our constant gratitude and attention? She laughed bitterly. It doesn't work like that, Hugh. I looked at Lawrence, expecting him to intervene, to say something in my defense, but he stood silent, eyes downcast, letting his wife humiliate me in front of all their friends. Lawrence? I called out, hoping he would at least look at me. He looked up, and in his eyes I saw a mixture of shame and relief. It was as if he had wanted to say something like that for a long time, but hadn't dared, and now he was glad Beatrice had done it for him. Beatrice is right, grandfather, he said quietly. You can't just show up with money and expect things to change. It's not that simple. His words hurt me deeper than anything Beatrice had said. I felt something inside me break the last thread that connected me to my son through his child. I never expected anything in return, I said, trying to keep my voice firm. I just wanted to help, to be a part of your life. Son, well, we appreciate the help, Beatrice said, her voice cold and determined. But other than that, she paused, looking straight into my eyes. Thank you for the gift, and now get out. Her words sounded like a slap. For a moment, I could not believe that she had really said it, that Lawrence had allowed her to say it. There was a sepulchral silence around the table. Some of the guests looked down at their plates, clearly embarrassed by the situation. Others watched with ill-concealed curiosity. I straightened slowly, gathering my remaining dignity. I understand. I turned to Lawrence. Your father would be disappointed. The words hit the mark. Lawrence flinched as if struck by a blow, but he remained silent, letting it all happen. Without another word, I turned and walked toward the exit. No one tried to stop me. No one said a word. As I walked through the house, I heard the conversations at the table slowly resume, as if nothing had happened, as if they hadn't just kicked out the old man who had given them this house. Getting into the car, I didn't start the engine right away. My hands were shaking, and my throat was lumpy. I hadn't cried since my son's funeral, but now I felt tears coming to my eyes. Not so much from resentment, but from the realization that I had lost my grandson as completely as I had once lost my son. Instead of driving home, I headed to Silas Porter's office. Despite the day off, I knew he often worked on Saturdays. His older silver Volvo was parked in the parking lot in front of the small office building that housed his law office. I knocked on the office door, and after a few seconds, Silas opened it, raising his eyebrows in surprise. Hugh? What's wrong? I need to talk to you, I said, trying to control my voice, about the deed of gift. Silas let me inside and motioned for me to sit down. His office always reminded me of an old-fashioned library, dark wooden shelves of books, a massive desk, a leather chair. The place smelled of paper and coffee. "What happened?" he asked, sitting down across from me. I told him everything about the barbecue, about Beatrice's words, about Lawrence's acquiescence. With each word, I felt the bitterness inside me change to determination. Silas listened intently, not interrupting. When I finished, he took a deep breath. "I warned you, Hugh. That woman never appreciated your gift. It was just a good deal to her." "I know," I replied quietly. "You were right, and I was a naive old fool. But now I want to know, can I undo the gift?" Silas rubbed his chin. "We included a clause that says you can cancel in the case of extreme ingratitude. I think what happened today falls within that definition." He slid open a desk drawer and pulled out a folder of documents. "Give me a few minutes to go over the exact wording." While Silas studied the documents, I stared out the window at the quiet street of Avenel. Saturday afternoon, people walking with their kids, coming out of stores with packages, living their normal lives. And my life had just been turned upside down. "Good news, Hugh," Silas said at last. "We can start the process of revoking the gift. It'll take time and possibly a court case if they challenge it, but we have every reason to." I nodded, feeling oddly calm. "Do what you need to do, Silas." "I want this house back." "Are you sure?" he asked, looking me in the eye. "It could lead to a complete breakdown in my relationship with my grandson." "The relationship is already broken," I replied. "Lawrence made his choice today, and it wasn't me." Silas nodded understandingly and began to prepare the necessary documents. I sat in his office, signing the papers and listening to the explanations of the upcoming procedure. The feeling of resentment was slowly giving way to determination. I was prepared for what awaited me, and I wasn't about to back down. Leaving Silas's office felt different than when I'd entered. Yes, I was hurt and disappointed, but I was also determined to teach a lesson to the ungrateful young men who thought they could use me and throw me away like a worthless thing. On the way home, I remembered the words of my father, who had said to me many years before, "Hugh, kindness is not a weakness, but you must not let others take it for granted." I had not fully understood those words then. Now they had a new meaning for me. When I got home, I sat on the veranda, looking at my garden, at the peonies that Edith loved so much. "What would you do in my place?" I mentally asked her. Though I couldn't hear her answer, I knew she would have supported my decision. Edith had always valued justice above all else. That night I made a firm decision. I would rescind the deed of gift and reclaim the house I had so carelessly given to people who didn't value the gift or the giver. It wasn't just a decision dictated by resentment. It was an act of self-respect that I needed after the humiliation I had suffered today. As I fell asleep that night, I felt a strange calmness. For the first time in a long time, I was sure I was doing the right thing. And that certainty brought me a peace I had not felt since I had decided to give the house to Lawrence and Beatrice. I spent the next few days in a state of strange calm. The inner storm caused by Beatrice's words and Lawrence's betrayal gradually subsided, giving way to a cold determination. I made no attempt to contact them, and neither did they call me. This silence spoke more eloquently than any words. All that needed to be said had already been said that unfortunate day. Monday morning, I called Silas and made an appointment. Even though we had already discussed the main points on Saturday, I wanted to make sure I fully understood the procedure for revoking a gift and all the possible consequences. Silas set the meeting for 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I spent the morning preparing for it. I gathered all the documents related to the purchase of the house and even found a recording of my conversation with Lawrence when I had first offered him the gift. I'd often recorded phone conversations in those days, a habit left over from my days as a trucker, when important instructions from the dispatcher were best saved. Silas's office was in an old building in downtown Avenel, a 15-minute drive from my house. When I walked in, his secretary, an older woman named Mabel who had worked with him for 20 years, smiled welcomingly at me. "Good morning, Mr. Prescott. Mr. Porter is expecting you." Silas met me in his office as usual, dressed in an austere suit despite the summer heat. He pointed to the chair across from his desk. "Have a seat, Hugh. I've been exploring our options in more detail." I sat down, placing the file folder on the desk. "And what are they?" Silas took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "According to the gift agreement we drew up, You have the right to cancel the gift if the giver is extremely ungrateful. It's a legal term, and the courts interpret it differently. But in your case, he paused, searching for words. I think we have a very strong case. What exactly falls under the definition of extreme ingratitude? I asked. Usually it's physical violence, threats, public humiliation, or acts intended to cause serious moral harm to the giver, Silas answered. So in your case, public humiliation and banishment from the house you gave yourself would certainly qualify as an act of extreme ingratitude. I nodded, remembering Beatrice's words. Thank you for the gift. Now get out. That phrase still rang in my ears like a slap in the face. What do we need to do? Silas opened the file folder. We're going to file a lawsuit to rescind the gift. We'll need your detailed testimony about the events of that day, preferably with witnesses, if there are any. Witnesses? I frowned. There were a lot of people there, but they were all friends of Lawrence and Beatrice. I doubt any of them would be willing to take my side. Silas tapped his fingers on the table thoughtfully. That makes it harder, but it doesn't make it hopeless. We still have your testimony, and more importantly, the extreme ingratitude clause in the deed of gift itself. Besides, he held up a finger, I suggest we act quickly before Lawrence and Beatrice realize the consequences of their actions and try to smooth things over somehow. The thought made me wonder, what if they tried to apologize? Would I be able to forgive them after everything that had happened? The part of me that still saw Lawrence as a little boy running around the yard with a homemade airplane, wanted to believe that reconciliation was possible. But the other part, the part that saw him standing there silently, letting his wife humiliate me, knew that some bridges had already been burned. You're right, I said finally. Let's act fast. We spent the next 2 hours drafting the lawsuit. Silas asked me questions, wrote down my answers, paused occasionally to formulate something more legally precise. I told him everything, from the moment I'd first offered to buy their house to Beatrice's last words and Lawrence's acquiescence. You know, Hugh, said Silas when we had finished, I've been a lawyer for 35 years, and I've seen a lot of family drama. But such ingratitude, he shook his head. It's rare, even in my practice, I shrugged. I always thought that Lawrence and I had a stronger relationship, that the blood, I stammered, unable to finish the sentence. Blood isn't always thicker than water, Silas finished softly for me. Sometimes the people closest to you can hurt the most. I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. We agreed that Silas would file the lawsuit the next day, and I signed the necessary paperwork. As I walked out of his office, I felt a strange sense of relief, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The decision had been made, and now everything was in the hands of the law. Instead of driving home, I headed for the cemetery where Edith and Quentin were buried. I hadn't been there in months, and now I felt an urgent need to talk to them, even if only unilaterally. Avenel Cemetery was located on a small hill on the outskirts of town, a quiet, well-maintained place with sprawling oak trees providing shade on hot summer days. I parked at the entrance and walked slowly down the familiar path to the family plot. Edith and Quentin's graves were next to each other under an old maple tree. Simple granite headstones with their names, dates of life, and short epitaphs. Edith's stone was engraved, loving wife and mother whose kindness lit up our lives. On Quentin's stone, son, father, builder of bridges between people. I sat down on a bench next to the graves and was silent for a long time, listening to the rustling of leaves overhead and the distant sounds of the city. I don't know if I'm doing the right thing, I said quietly, but I don't see any other way out. The wind ruffled the leaves of the maple tree, as if in response to my words. I imagined what Edith would say. She'd always been gentler than me, more forgiving, but even she didn't tolerate disrespect and ingratitude. Do you remember, Quentin, how you taught Lawrence respect? I continued, turning to my son's grave. How you told him that a real man always keeps his word and respects his elders, especially his family. I remembered an incident when Lawrence was about 10. Quentin and I took him fishing, and the boy was cranky, not wanting to help with the boat and tackle. Quentin then took him aside and had a long talk with him. I didn't hear their conversation, but after that, Lawrence changed. He began to help, asking what else needed to be done. That evening, when Lawrence fell asleep in the car on the way back, I asked Quentin what he had said to his son. I just reminded him that family is the most important thing we have, Quentin replied, and that respecting our elders is not just a rule of courtesy, but a way of expressing gratitude for the life and experiences they give us. Somewhere along the way, Lawrence forgot those lessons, or maybe Beatrice helped him forget. Either way, the result was obvious. My grandson allowed his wife to humiliate me and kick me out of the home I had given them. I think you'd be disappointed, son, I said quietly. But maybe this lesson will do him good. Maybe he'll finally remember what you taught him. I sat in the cemetery until sundown, thinking about life, about family, about the values we passed down from generation to generation. When I finally got up to leave, it was hard on my soul, but peaceful. I knew I was doing what I had to do, not out of revenge, but out of self-respect and for the sake of remembering the lessons Quentin was trying to pass on to his son. The following weeks passed in suspense. Silas had filed the lawsuit, and now all we had to do was wait for Lawrence and Beatrice's reaction and the court's decision. I tried to occupy myself with daily activities, working in the garden, meeting with friends, reading books I'd put off for a long time, but my thoughts kept returning to the situation with the house and how things had turned out. Norman came to see me a week after the lawsuit was filed. We sat on the veranda sipping beer and watching the sunset. "How are you, old boy?" he asked, looking at me carefully. "I'm fine," I replied. "Life goes on." Norman chuckled. "You know, I always thought you were too soft on that boy. Always gave him everything he wanted. Never demanded anything in return." I thought about what he'd said. Maybe he was right. Maybe I really had spoiled Lawrence, always giving him what he wanted without demanding responsibility or respect. Maybe this latest gift was just the culmination of a long history of indulgence. "Shakumiya, maybe you're right," I finally said. "But I'd always wanted the best for him. I wanted him to have what I didn't have when I was his age. And look where that got us." Norman shook his head. "Sometimes the best things we can give our children are not money or things, but life lessons. Even if those lessons are painful." His words made me think. Maybe canceling the gift would really be a lesson for Lawrence. A lesson that actions have consequences, that respect can't be bought but can be lost. The day after I talked to Norman, Silas called me. "Hugh, they received notice of the lawsuit. Their lawyer contacted me." I tensed up. "What are they saying?" "They deny extreme ingratitude," Silas chuckled. "They call it a family misunderstanding. They suggest an out-of-court settlement." "What exactly are they offering?" I asked, even though I knew I wouldn't compromise. "They're willing to formally apologize and even include you in the will for the house," Silas replied. "But they want to keep the house." I shook my head, though Silas couldn't see it over the phone. "No, no compromise. Either the house comes back to me or we go to court." "I thought you were going to say that," Silas said with approval. "I'll tell them your position." After that conversation, I felt a strange satisfaction. It meant they were beginning to realize the gravity of the situation. They were beginning to realize that their actions had consequences. That's good. That was the first step toward the lesson I wanted to teach them. That evening, I pulled out an old photo album and started flipping through it, looking at pictures from the past. Here's Edith holding newborn Quentin. Here we are as a family on a picnic by the lake. Here's Quentin in his first construction helmet, smiling proudly for the camera. Here he is holding little Lawrence. And here are the three of us, me, Quentin, and Lawrence, on the very fishing trip I was reminiscing about in the cemetery. Looking at those photos, I felt a strange mixture of nostalgia and bitterness. Somewhere along the way, we had lost something that bound us together. Somewhere we took a wrong turn, and now I was alone, looking at pictures of people who were either gone forever or strangers. But there was another thought that crossed my mind as I leafed through the album. Maybe this isn't the end, but a new beginning? Maybe instead of clinging to the past and to connections that no longer exist, I should start building a new life. A life where I would value myself and my needs the same way I had always valued the needs of others. The thought was both frightening and liberating. I was 67 years old, not so young but not so old that I couldn't start something new. I had health, I had means, I had freedom. What could I do with that freedom? Where could I go? What could I see? I fell asleep with these thoughts, and I dreamed of Edith. She stood in our old garden among the peonies and smiled at me. Live, Hugh, she said. Live for yourself. You deserve it. When I awoke in the morning, I felt unusually light and clear. It was as if the decision I had made had opened up new horizons, new possibilities in front of me. I was no longer just a resentful old man who wanted to take revenge on ungrateful relatives. I was a man who was standing up for his dignity and preparing for a new chapter of his life. In the days that followed, I began to plan. At first vaguely, just thinking of possibilities, then more and more concretely. I had always wanted to travel, to see the Grand Canyon, to walk the streets of Paris, to visit fishing villages in Italy. Edith and I used to put off these plans for later, for retirement, for when the kids were grown. And then she got sick, and all the plans fell by the wayside. Then she and Quentin were gone, and I was left alone, forgetting my dreams in the care of my grandson and daily chores. Maybe now was the time to remember those dreams. Maybe the house I had so generously given and was now about to give back could be the means to realize them. These thoughts occupied me as the process of revoking the gift went on. Silas kept me informed every step of the way, every conversation with Lawrence and Beatrice's lawyer. They tried to challenge our claim, offered various compromises, but I was adamant. The house had to come back to me, fully and unconditionally. Finally, 3 weeks after filing the suit, Silas called me with the news. Hugh, they're giving up. Their lawyer just contacted me. They're agreeing to a voluntary termination of the gift agreement. I felt something inside me relax, the tension I'd been carrying around all these weeks. Why did they change their minds, I asked, even though I guessed the reason. Their lawyer doesn't see any chance of winning the case, Silas answered. We're in too strong a position. Plus, he paused, they don't seem to want the details of their behavior made public in court. That made sense. Beatrice, with her desire for prestige and status, would hardly want her neighbors in Oak Hill to know how she treated the elderly relative who'd given her the house. What's next? I asked. We'll sign a quitclaim deed, and they'll have to vacate the house within 30 days, Silas replied. I've already prepared the documents. Can you come over to sign them tomorrow? Sure, I said. Thank you, Silas, for everything. You're welcome, he said. Sometimes justice prevails even without a trial. The next day, I signed the papers in Silas's office. It was official. The deed of gift was canceled. The house was coming back to me, and Lawrence and Beatrice had to vacate it by the end of the month. Silas handed me a copy of the notice that had already been sent to them. That's it, he said, shaking my hand. Congratulations, Hugh. You've defended your dignity. I nodded, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Yes, but at what cost? Silas smiled understandingly. Sometimes self-respect is worth more than family ties, especially when those ties have long been an illusion. As I left his office, I thought about the fact that now I had a home again, a big, beautiful house in an upscale neighborhood, a house I hadn't wanted for myself, but which could now be the means to fulfill my long-held dreams. I could sell it, perhaps even at a profit, given the renovations Lawrence and Beatrice had made, and use the money to travel, to live a new life. The thought brought me an unexpected satisfaction. Maybe things would turn out for the best in the long run. Maybe this painful experience was necessary for me to finally start living for myself instead of others. Sitting behind the wheel on the way home, I felt a smile appear on my face, the first genuine smile I'd seen in a long time. Change was ahead, and I was ready for it. The July morning was unusually clear and crisp. I sat on the veranda with a cup of coffee, watching the first rays of sunlight break through the leaves of the trees in my garden. The air was filled with the scent of freshly cut grass and blooming roses. Norman had helped me mow the lawn last night, and the rose bushes Edith had planted years ago were in their second wave of bloom. In these moments of peace and quiet, I have often thought about the future. After receiving notice of the finalization of the repossession of the house, I began to make plans. The trip to Europe that Edith and I had always dreamed of, but never realized, now seemed quite realistic. I even ordered some guidebooks and began researching itineraries. Italy, France, Spain, countries that I knew only from movies and books could soon become part of my own memories. My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a car pulling up. I wasn't expecting visitors, especially this early. The clock read only 8 in the morning. Putting down my coffee, I stood up and walked to the edge of the veranda to see who had arrived. To my surprise, a familiar silver Lexus, Lawrence's car, stopped at the gate. I hadn't seen my grandson since that ill-fated barbecue, and frankly, I hadn't expected to see him so soon after sending the eviction notice. Silas had warned me that they might try to contact me directly, bypassing the lawyers, but I thought it would be later, closer to the eviction date. Lawrence got out of the car alone, without Beatrice. He looked exhausted. His hair was mussed, dark circles under his eyes, his shirt wrinkled, as if he'd slept in it. It was so unlike his usual neat appearance that I felt a pang of worry for a moment. What could have brought my always put-together grandson to this state? He saw me on the veranda and stopped halfway, as if hesitant to come closer. His eyes were a mixture of emotions: fear, anger, confusion. "Grandfather," he said at last, his voice hoarse, as if he'd been screaming or up all night. "We need to talk." I paused, weighing the situation. Part of me wanted to send him to Silas, to tell him that all negotiations now had to be done through lawyers. But the other part, the part that still saw him as the little boy I'd taught to cast a line, couldn't just turn away. "Come on up," I said at last, pointing to the veranda. "Do you want coffee?" He nodded and walked slowly up the steps. I noticed that he staggered a little, as if he hadn't fully awakened, or, more likely, hadn't slept all night. We sat down at a small table on the veranda. I poured him coffee from the thermos I always kept near me during morning sit-downs. Lawrence clasped the cup with both hands as if trying to warm himself, though the morning was warm. "We got the notice," he said finally, looking into the cup instead of at me. "The eviction notice." I nodded, seeing no point in denying the obvious. "Yes, Silas sent it yesterday." 30 days, Lawrence shook his head. "You give us 30 days to find a new place to live, pack everything up, and move. Beatrice is 8 months pregnant, Grandpa." 30 days! His voice was accusatory, as if I were doing something unreasonable and cruel. I felt the irritation rising inside. "How much time did you give me to leave your barbecue? 5 minutes? Or less?" Lawrence flinched as if I'd hit him. It was an emotional moment. "That's not what Beatrice meant. She was upset. The hormones, the pregnancy." "Don't," I interrupted him. "Don't blame it on Beatrice's hormones. You stood by her, Lawrence. You did nothing to stop her. You let her humiliate me in front of all your friends." He lowered his head, acknowledging the truth of my words. "I know. And it's my fault. I should have intervened. But Grandpa, taking our home away from us? It's too much." "I'm not taking the house away from you," I argued. "I am rescinding a gift that I made willingly and in good faith, but which was not properly appreciated." Lawrence looked up at me, and I saw tears in his eyes. "We appreciate it, Grandpa." "I swear we do. Beatrice is just... she doesn't know how to express gratitude. She grew up in a family where everything was taken for granted. But that's no excuse, I know." I stared at him, trying to see the sincerity behind his words. Was this really a remorseful grandson realizing his mistake? Or just a scared young man who was afraid of losing his comfortable life in an upscale neighborhood? "Where is Beatrice?" I asked, changing the subject. "Why did you come alone?" Lawrence sighed. "She's at home. We had a fight last night after we got the notice. She blames me for not changing your mind sooner. Says I should have taken control of the situation." That sounded a lot like Beatrice. Shifting responsibility onto others, believing that problems can be taken under control if you're persistent enough to demand your own. "And what do you think about that?" I asked. Lawrence ran his hand through his hair, ruffling it even more. "I think we're both to blame. I let her talk to you the way she did. I didn't stop her when she kicked you out. And now we're paying for it." He looked me straight in the eye. "But I'm begging you, Grandpa, don't do this. Don't take the house away from us. Not now, when Beatrice is about to give birth." I looked at my grandson and saw in him the boy I had once known, sincere, open-hearted. But I also saw a man who had allowed his wife to humiliate me, who had stood silent when I was kicked out of the house I had given them myself. And I wasn't sure who to believe, the boy or the man. 30 days is the standard time frame for eviction," I said finally. "I'm not doing anything unusual or cruel. The law is on my side, Lawrence." "I know." He lowered his head. "But we're not talking about the law, we're talking about family, about your future great-granddaughter, who will be born in a month." Lawrence's suggestion to give them more time was reasonable. I promised to think about it, and he left, somewhat reassured that I would at least consider the option. In the afternoon, just as Lawrence had warned me, Beatrice arrived. She looked different than I remembered. No makeup, eyes puffy from crying, wearing a simple maternity dress instead of the usual designer outfits. Her large belly seemed to emphasize her vulnerability even more. "Hugh," she said quietly when I opened the door. "May I come in?" I let her in and led her into the living room. Beatrice sank awkwardly onto the sofa, stroking her stomach as if to reassure herself. "I came to apologize," she began, looking me in the eye. "What I said at the barbecue, it was unforgivable. I was upset, but that's no excuse. I behaved terribly." I listened in silence, trying to determine how sincere her words were. Beatrice was always a good actress when it came to her interests. "Sorry, no. I beg you," she continued, and her voice trembled. "Don't take the house away from us. Not now when I'm about to give birth. Give us a chance to make things right." "Beatrice," I said calmly, "I can forgive your words, but the house will come back to me. That decision is final. It's just a question of timing." Her face changed from hope to disappointment to anger. "You don't understand." Her voice hardened. "This house is our home. We've put money, time, effort into it. You can't just take it back because of one argument." "It's not just a fight, Beatrice," I objected. "You humiliated me in front of all your friends, kicked me out of the house I gave you." She jumped up as far as her stomach would allow, her face flushed with anger. "You vindictive old man! You use one mistake to punish us. What about the baby? Do you want me to give birth under stress? In the middle of a move?" "That's why I'm considering extending the eviction," I replied. "But that doesn't change the fact that the house is coming back to me." Beatrice grabbed her purse, which she placed next to her on the couch. "You're going to regret this. When you're old and alone, with no family, no grandchildren to visit you, you'll regret it." "Maybe," I agreed, "but I'd rather be old and alone than let someone treat me the way you've treated me." She gave me one last furious look and ran out of the house, slamming the door. I had just made it back to the kitchen when the phone rang. When I saw Lawrence's name on the screen, I answered it. "Yes, Lawrence. What did you say to Beatrice?" His voice sounded strained, with barely contained anger. She came back in tears, barely able to speak. "I told her the truth," I answered calmly. "That I was considering extending the eviction, but that the house would come back to me anyway." "Is that all?" Lawrence asked incredulously. "She says you called her manipulative, accused her of using the pregnancy." "Lawrence, let's be honest. That's exactly what you're both doing, using Beatrice's pregnancy as an argument for why I should change my mind." "Because it's an important factor," he exclaimed. "We're talking about the health of your great-granddaughter." "Watch your language, Lawrence," I said sternly. "I'm still your grandfather. A grandfather who throws us out on the street for one quarrel." There was accusation in his voice. "What kind of grandfather does that?" "A grandfather who was thrown out of a house he gave himself," I answered. "A grandfather who was humiliated in front of all his grandson's friends. A grandfather who was told, 'Thanks for the gift, now get out.'" There was silence on the other end of the line. All I could hear was Lawrence's heavy breathing. "It was a mistake," he said at last, his voice quieter. "A terrible, unforgivable mistake. But must the punishment be so final? This is our home we're talking about, grandfather. A place for your great-granddaughter to grow up." "You'll find another place to live, Lawrence," I said. "You've both got good jobs. You're young. You've got everything ahead of you. It's not the end of the world." "It is the end of the world for Beatrice," he objected. "You don't understand what this house, this neighborhood means to her. All her life she's dreamed of living in Oak Hill, of being part of this community. And now you're taking that dream away from her." "I'm not taking it away, Lawrence. You took it away when you decided you could treat me like garbage that you could throw away when it became inconvenient." "Grandfather, please." His voice sounded almost pleading. "Let's find a compromise. What if we pay you the value of the house, gradually, with interest, like a mortgage?" I sighed. This is it. The bidding has begun. First the pleading and apologies, then the accusations and threats. Now the attempts to find a financial compromise. Classic stages of bargaining. "Lawrence, I told you, my decision is final. The house is coming back to me. I can give you more time to evict, but no more than that. You leave us no choice." His voice suddenly turned cold. "We will fight for this house. Legally, to the last man." "That's your right," I said calmly. "But Silas is sure the law's on my side. All you'll get is extra legal fees and publicity for your behavior in court." "Are you really willing to do that?" Lawrence asked. "Air all our dirty laundry in public? Embarrass the family?" "I'm not afraid of the truth, Lawrence," I said. "I have done nothing to be ashamed of. Can you and Beatrice say the same?" He did not answer, and in the silence I heard his heavy breathing. Finally he said, "You'll regret it, grandfather. We'll all regret it." And he hung up the phone. I stared at the phone in my hand, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and determination. Part of me, the part of me that still saw Lawrence as a little boy running around the garden with a toy airplane, was hurting from this breakup. But the other part, the part that remembered his acquiescence when Beatrice humiliated me, knew I was doing the right thing. In the evening, Silas called. "Hugh, their lawyer contacted me. They're offering a financial settlement to buy the house at market price with installment payments." "I had already rejected that offer when Lawrence offered it to me personally," I replied. "My position hasn't changed. The house is coming back to me. I can give them a grace period until the baby is born, but no more than that." Silas chuckled. "That's what I told their lawyer. He hinted that they might go to court." "Let them try," I said. "We have a strong case. You said so yourself." "Yeah, but a trial is always a risk. And publicity? Are you sure you want that?" I thought of Lawrence's words about dirty laundry and shame on the family. Yes, a trial would mean that everything that happened between us would become public. But unlike Lawrence and Beatrice, I had nothing to be ashamed of. "I'm sure, Silas. If they want a trial, they'll get one. But I don't think it will come to that. They care too much about their reputation to let the whole town know how they treated me." "You're probably right," Silas agreed. I'll tell their lawyer our terms, a reprieve until the baby's born. Nothing more." After I talked to Silas, I sat on the veranda for a long time, watching the sunset. The sky was colored in shades of orange and pink, gradually turning to a deep blue. I thought of Lawrence and Beatrice, of their threats and pleas. I thought of the future great-granddaughter to be born into this tense situation. I thought of Quentin and what he would say about what was happening. Perhaps Lawrence was right and we would all regret it. But sometimes life requires us to make tough decisions, and I was willing to live with the consequences of mine. Despite my offers to extend the eviction until the baby was born, Lawrence and Beatrice did not accept my terms. Their attorney continued to push for a complete reversal of the gift annulment judgment, which I was absolutely not going to do. After a week of fruitless negotiations, Silas informed me that they had decided not to contest the eviction in court. Apparently, their attorney had explained to them the futility of such an endeavor, but neither had they accepted my offer of a continuance. Instead, they were simply preparing for eviction within the specified time frame. This decision surprised me. I was willing to give them more time for the sake of Beatrice's health and the baby's future, but they chose pride over common sense. That was their right, however, and I had no intention of imposing my help on them. The day of the eviction fell in mid-August, a hot, sweltering day when the air seemed to stagnate, and even the birds were silent in the shade of the trees. I hadn't planned to attend the eviction. Silas was supposed to meet with them and their lawyer to officially hand me the keys and papers, but that morning I received a text from Lawrence, short and unexpected. "Grandpa, please be at the house by 2 o'clock today. It's important." Lawrence. I stared at that message for a long time, trying to figure out what was behind it. Was this another attempt at manipulation? Or perhaps a desire to say goodbye in a human way? I decided to go after all. The house was mine again, and I had every right to be there. Silas, whom I called to inform him of my decision, didn't approve. "Hugh, I don't think you should be there. Eviction is always an emotional process, especially under these circumstances. Let me deal with it." "I appreciate your concern, Silas," I replied, "but I want to be there. It's my home, and Lawrence asked me to come." Silas sighed. "Okay, but I'll be around just in case, and if things get too tense, we'll leave." I agreed to this reasonable suggestion, and we agreed to meet at Lawrence and Beatrice's house, now my house, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. As we approached a familiar street in Oak Hill, I noticed a moving truck parked at the curb. Workers were removing boxes and furniture from the house, loading them into the back of the truck. Lawrence's car was nowhere to be seen, and I assumed he had already left with the first shipment of stuff for their new place of residence. I parked behind the truck and got out of the car. The day was really hot, and I felt the sweat instantly appear on my forehead. Silas, who had arrived a little earlier, was waiting for me on the sidewalk in front of the house. "They're almost done," he said, shaking my hand. "Lawrence left about an hour ago with the first batch of stuff. Beatrice is inside, picking up the last little things." I nodded, looking at the house. It looked almost exactly the same as the day I'd first seen it. Beautiful, well-kept, with flowering hydrangea bushes along the path to the front door. Only now it was mine again, though I still didn't know what to do with it. "Shall we go inside?" Silas asked. I nodded, and we headed for the front door, which was open for the convenience of the workers taking things out. Inside, the house looked almost empty. Most of the furniture was already gone, with only a few boxes in the hallway and some things in the kitchen. We found Beatrice in the living room. She was standing at the window looking out at the garden, one hand resting on her huge belly. She was dressed in a simple summer dress, her hair gathered in a careless bun. When she heard our footsteps, she turned, and I saw that her face was swollen with tears. "Hugh," she said quietly, "you have come." "Lawrence asked me to come," I answered, looking around. "Where is he?" Beatrice shook her head. "He left with the first shipment of things." He doesn't know that I asked you to come." I looked at her in surprise. "You were the one who sent the message from his phone?" She nodded, lowering her eyes. "Yes, I knew you wouldn't come if I asked on my behalf." I felt the irritation rising inside. More manipulation, more deception. Even on the last day, even at the moment of eviction, she couldn't be honest. "What do you want, Beatrice?" I asked her bluntly. "Why did you call me here?" She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "I want to apologize to you. A real one, not like last time." I looked at her skeptically, crossing my arms over my chest. "And what's changed since last time?" "Everything," she answered quietly. "Lawrence and we've talked about a lot of things over the weeks. I realized what a terrible thing I'd done to you. Not just at the barbecue, but all the time before that. I'd always looked down on you, thought," she stammered. "I didn't think you were good enough for our social circle. It was arrogant and stupid of me." Her words sounded sincere, but I knew her acting skills too well to believe it unreservedly. "I appreciate your apology, Beatrice," I said. "But as I said, it doesn't change my mind about the house." "I know," she nodded. "Sure, and I'm not asking you to change your mind. We found an apartment not too far from here. It's not as big or as upscale, but it's decent. We'll be fine." She took a step toward me, and I noticed that she staggered a little, as if she was having trouble keeping her balance with such a big belly. "I just want you to know that I'm really sorry for what I did, and I hope—" She hesitated again. "I hope that in time you can forgive me, for Lawrence's sake, and for the baby's sake." I stared at her, trying to see how sincere her words were. There was something in her eyes, in the tremor of her voice, that made me think that this time she was telling the truth, or at least believing what she was saying at the moment. "Beatrice, I already said I forgive you," I replied. "I hold no grudges. But forgiveness doesn't mean that things will go back to the way they were." She nodded, but then, to my amazement, knelt down in front of me. It looked awkward because of her stomach, and I instinctively took a step forward, fearing she might lose her balance. "Beatrice, what are you doing? Stand up, this isn't necessary." "Yes, it is," she said, looking up at me. "I must show you how seriously I take my words. I beg you, Hugh, give us another chance. Don't give up on us completely, for the sake of your great-granddaughter." I felt something clench in my chest at the sight of this proud woman kneeling before me. It was wrong, humiliating, and I didn't want it. "Beatrice, please stand up," I said, holding out my hand to her. "This is not the way to handle such matters." She shook her head, not accepting my hand. "I'm not getting up until you say you're giving us a chance, that you will be a part of your great-granddaughter's life, that our family isn't completely destroyed." I sighed, realizing she wouldn't relent. Stubbornness was one of her main character traits, a trait I'd once considered her flaw, but now in this situation, I almost respected. Beatrice, I began, choosing my words carefully. I am not giving up my great-granddaughter. When she is born, I shall be glad to meet her. But as for you and Lawrence and me, I paused, looking into her hopeful eyes. You know I'm grateful to you. You've shown me that my blood isn't always my family. Her face changed, hope replaced by shock, then incomprehension. What? What do you mean? Hannah, I mean that family isn't just shared genes. It's respect, caring, reciprocity. All the things that have been missing from our relationship all these years. You and Lawrence, you're my blood, but you haven't acted like family. And I'm too old to keep clinging to illusions of a kinship that exists only on paper. Beatrice looked at me with wide open eyes, clearly not expecting such an answer. But, but the child? Your great-granddaughter? I shall be glad to meet her, I repeated. But I won't impose. If you want me to be a part of her life, you know where to find me. If not, well, that will be your choice. I held out my hand to her again. Now please stand up. In your position, you shouldn't be on your knees. This time she accepted my hand and I helped her up. Her face expressed a mixture of shock, disappointment, and perhaps the first glimmers of understanding. Are you really not coming back? She asked quietly. Not even for the sake of the child? I'm not leaving, Beatrice, I replied. I just stopped clinging to relationships that don't really exist, and I'm beginning to appreciate what I do have in my life. She looked at me for a long time, and I could see some inner struggle in her eyes. Finally, she nodded. I understand, and I respect your decision, though I had hoped for a different outcome. Sometimes life doesn't give us what we hope for, I said, but often it gives us what we really need. She smiled weakly. Philosopher. Lawrence always said you were fond of profound phrases. A habit of long drives, I replied with a slight smile. Plenty of time to think. At that moment, one of the workers came into the room. Ma'am, we're done with the rest of the stuff. All that's left are those boxes in the hallway. Beatrice nodded to him. Thank you, Tom. I'll be right with you. The worker left, and it was just the three of us again. Me, Beatrice, and Silas, who had been standing silently at the door the whole time, ready to intervene if things got out of hand. I have to go, Beatrice said. Lawrence is waiting for me at the new place. She paused for a moment as if unsure how to say goodbye, and then simply nodded. Goodbye, Hugh. Thank you for the house. Even if we couldn't keep it, it's been a good few months. Goodbye, Beatrice, I replied. Good luck with the baby. I hope she'll be healthy and happy. Beatrice nodded again and headed for the exit. At the door, she turned around. Will you really be happy to meet her? When she's born? I really would, I replied. Just let me know when and where. She smiled, and for the first time since we'd talked, and left the room. A few minutes later, Silas and I heard her car start and drive away from the house. Well, Silas said, walking over to me, that was unexpected. I thought there would be more drama. Me too, I admitted. But Beatrice did seem to have realized something over the weeks. Or maybe she just decided to change tactics, Silas said with a cynical smile. Either way, congratulations, Hugh. The house is yours again. What do you plan to do with it? I looked around at the empty living room, where every trace of Lawrence and Beatrice had disappeared. Even the smell of their perfume and cologne was gone, replaced by the scent of the cleaning supplies they'd obviously used to clean up before they left. I'm going to sell it, I said firmly. This house had never been for me, and it made all the more sense to keep it now. Silas nodded. A sensible decision. Real estate prices in Oak Hill have gone up in recent months. You'll be able to get more than you paid for it. It's not about the money, I shook my head, although it would certainly be good for my plans. What plans? Silas asked. I smiled, feeling the excitement growing inside at the thought of the future. I'm going to travel, Silas. To see all those places Edith and I dreamed of, but never visited. Italy, France, Spain, maybe even Japan and Australia. Silas whistled. Not bad plans for someone your age, but I'm happy for you, Hugh. It's about time you live for yourself. That's right, I agreed. For too long I've lived for others, for work, for my son, for my grandson. It's time to remember my dreams. We left the house and Silas locked the door, handing me the keys. Here, they're yours again. I'll do the paperwork for the sale, if you're sure you want to sell it. I'm absolutely sure, I nodded, accepting the keys. The sooner the better. As I sat in the car, I took one last look at the house. A beautiful building that should have been a symbol of family unity, but instead had become the catalyst for the final breakup. It's strange how material things can sometimes show the true nature of people and relationships. The sale of the house came quicker than I expected. Silas found a buyer in just 2 weeks, a young couple with 2 children who had long dreamed of a house in Oak Hill. They offered even more than we were asking, for fear of missing out on such an opportunity in an upscale neighborhood. I agreed to the deal, and by the end of September, all the formalities were taken care of. The money was deposited into my account, an amount that allowed me not just to travel, but to do so comfortably without worrying about expenses. In early October, I received a message from Lawrence. Grandpa, we have a daughter. Chloe Elizabeth Prescott, 3 pounds 500 grams, 51 centimeters. Mom and baby are feeling well. If you'd like to meet your great-granddaughter, we'd love to see you at St. Mary's Hospital, room 312. I stared at that message for a long time, feeling a strange mixture of emotions. Joy for the new life coming into this world, surprise that Lawrence had actually invited me, and doubt as to whether I should go, given everything that had happened between us. In the end, I decided to go, not for Lawrence's sake or Beatrice's, but for little Chloe, who was innocent. I bought a soft toy, a plush elephant similar to the one I'd tried to give at the barbecue, and went to the hospital. Lawrence met me in the hallway, looking both happy and exhausted, as a young father should. He hugged me, the first sincere gesture in a long time, and escorted me to my room. Beatrice was lying on the bed, holding a small bundle in her arms. She looked tired, but remarkably calm and peaceful. When she saw me, she smiled weakly. Hugh, you've come. Thank you. I came closer, looking at the tiny face peeking out of the diaper. Chloe was a little miracle, with fluffy blonde hair, chubby cheeks, and a tiny nose that looked just like Quentin's when he was a baby. She's beautiful, I said quietly. Congratulations to both of you. I held the toy out to Lawrence. This is for Chloe, when she's older. Lawrence accepted the gift with a grateful smile. Thank you, Grandpa. Do you want to hold it? I nodded, and Beatrice gently handed the baby to me. Holding this tiny creature in my arms, I felt something inside me soften, but not enough to change the decisions I had made. So we heard you'd sold the house, Lawrence said after a pause, and that you were going to travel. Yes, I confirmed, not taking my eyes off my great-granddaughter's face. The first flight is in a week, and Rome, then Florence, Venice, Paris. That sounds wonderful, Beatrice said, and there was none of her usual sarcasm in her voice. For how long? At least 6 months, I answered. Maybe longer. I haven't decided yet. Lawrence looked surprised. What about, he stammered, clearly not knowing. He hesitated, obviously not knowing how to phrase the question. What about you? I guessed what he was thinking. I'll leave contact info for Norman and Silas. If you need anything, contact them. Or email me directly. Email works all over the world. Lawrence nodded, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes. He was probably hoping that having a baby would change my plans, make me stay close to my family. But I was firm in my decision. I spent another hour with him, talking mostly about Chloe, avoiding difficult topics like our breakup or their new life in a less upscale neighborhood. When it was time to leave, I carefully handed the baby back to Beatrice. Take care of her, I said, looking at the baby, and teach her the right values. Not the ones associated with prestige or status, but the ones that make us human: kindness, honesty, respect for others. Beatrice nodded, clutching her daughter to her chest. I'll try, Hugh. I really will. Lawrence walked me to the elevator. Thank you for coming, Grandpa. It means a lot to us. It was a pleasure to meet Chloe, I replied. She's a real miracle. We stood at the elevator in awkward silence. Finally, Lawrence asked, You're coming back, aren't you, after the trip? I looked at my grandson, a grown man who nevertheless looked almost like a confused boy now. I will return to Avenel, yes, but whether I will return to your life, that will depend on many factors, Lawrence. What you learn in the meantime, on what kind of people you decide to become. He nodded, realizing that was the most honest answer he could hope for. Fair enough. Have a safe journey, grandfather. E. Be happy. Thank you, Lawrence. I shook his hand. I'll do my best. The elevator arrived, and I stepped inside, waving goodbye to my grandson. When the doors closed, I felt a strange sense of relief, as if it wasn't just an elevator door closing, but an entire chapter of my life. A week later, I was sitting on an airplane bound for Rome. There was an empty row of seats next to me. I decided to treat myself and bought a business class ticket where there was more room for my not-so-young legs. In my bag were guidebooks, maps, a list of hotels and restaurants I wanted to visit, and there was a lightness in my heart that I hadn't experienced in years. When the plane left the ground, I looked out the window at the shrinking Avenue, at the houses and streets that grew smaller and smaller until they were tiny dots on the map. Somewhere out there, in one of those dots, was my blood family Lawrence, Beatrice, and little Chloe. But my real family, those who respected me, valued me, and loved me not for gifts or money, but for who I was and was in my heart. Edith, Quentin, friends like Norman and Silas. And now I was ready to build a new life where there was no room for toxic relationships, even if it was my own family. A life where I finally came first, and it felt right, like a long-awaited homecoming after years away. The plane rose above the clouds, and all that was left under the wing was the white fluffy sea and endless blue sky. Ahead was Rome, Venice, Paris, all the places Edith and I had dreamed of. I closed my eyes, imagining her smiling down at me from heaven, satisfied that I was finally realizing our dream. I love you, Edith, I thought, and I will live life to the fullest for both of us. With that thought, I fell into a peaceful sleep, lulled by the hum of the engines and the anticipation of new adventures. I dreamed of Roman streets, Venetian canals, and Parisian cafes, and I was not alone in this dream. Everyone I had ever loved was with me, everyone who made up my real family.